today.
Yeah.
So today we're going to get started on the topic of mikvah. Okay, so we gave our introduction to this topic when we talked about marital intimacy, and I thought it was a fitting way of starting the discussion.
So look who you're talking to about this.
Oh, mikvah. You know what? It doesn't matter because I think it's really, I think it's an interesting topic to get to understand because it's so misunderstood. It's such a misunderstood topic. There's so many misconceptions about why a woman goes to the mikvah, and the whole, the prejudice against the idea that somehow Judaism thinks that a woman, a menstruant woman is something evil. That it's so important to know the real facts and to know the Torah's position on this. So anyway, as I said, the introduction was the previous topic. So just as by way of introduction, when I usually
You don't have. Are you going to be using that pen?
Not really.
Okay,
Go ahead.
good.
Yeah. So the introduction to this was almost That's okay. You don't have to take notes.
Well,
The introduction to this was the entire topic that we just covered, the idea of kedusha, holiness, and what it means in our lives. And we dealt with this. We talked about how other cultures, their idea of holiness has to do with abstention, with abstaining, right? Like a priest who is separate from society, separating from the world, not marrying. But God tells us that we have to be a part of this world. So our idea of holiness has nothing to do with the Christian way of becoming holy. It means kedusha, kadosh, holiness means separation. So what it specifically means is separating. We're separating, and I explained this last time as well, separating from the rest of the world and connecting to God, right? So the temple, the Beis HaMikdash, was called a kodesh, a place of holiness, because it's different from any other place, right? It's separate. Kiddush on Friday night has the same root of the word kadosh. Kiddush is the holiness, making a sanctification of the Friday night meal. So what does that mean? It means that we're taking a meal, an ordinary meal, and we're elevating it to a holy status. And that's why it's called Kiddush Friday night, right? So how do we become, you had a question? You had a question?
No, I just said really.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's why the word Kiddush has the root of the word kadosh, holy. So we are holifying, we are sanctifying that meal, that moment in time. So again, that is really the purpose of our entire life. We take mundane and we make it holy through the mitzvos. That's the purpose of the mitzvos, as we've said time and again, right? Everything has the potential for holiness. It's not that, that a priest, a Christian priest, a Catholic priest is, holy because he is separating himself from the world. He's not engaging in marriage and he's not engaging in marital relations. We don't have that idea. Everything, every physicality that we have, eating, drinking, sleeping, marital relations, all the physical elements of our life have the potential for holiness. And that's what the mitzvos come to help us do, to bring Kedusha into our lives, to bring God into our lives. We're fusing the physical and the spiritual by using the physical for spiritual purposes. Ramban says that Kedusha doesn't apply to just particular mitzvos. It's a whole approach to life. If you have the entire approach that I want to bring God into my life in everything I do, then I am holy. I am becoming holy. Okay, so and there are several kinds of kedusha, holiness. There's a kedusha of time, where we take a moment of time, like Shabbos is a moment in time, Yom Tov is a moment in time, and we make it a holy time. There's kedusha, holiness of place. For example, the Beis HaMikdash was a specific place that became holy, that was holy. And additional examples today would be a shul, which is, we call a miniature temple. That's our substitute for the temple today. And a place can also be like your table, your dining room table where you eat a meal. also has a status of Kedusha a little bit because we compare our dining tables to the table that was in the temple. And we say that is a substitute for the temple's table is our table. So, and then of course you do have individuals.
Is that why we do the mitzvahs? I mean, I know that there are things that we have in the temple, but
Right.
is
Yeah.
that because we want to elevate the Shabbos day?
Right, exactly. We are, and that's of course why we have
There's
challah.
that connection with it.
Yeah, and the connection goes to the challah too.
Mhm.
The challah that we have at our Shabbos table mimics
Mhm.
the challah that was put every week on the table, on the shulchan
Mhm.
in the temple as well. So we are trying to imitate and, represent the temple in our homes. That's one way we do it, yeah. Okay. And we also have a kedusha, holiness of an individual. We do have the sense that there are some people who are holier than other people. For example, the Kohen, the priest or the high priest. Now, again, it's different from lahavdil, a Catholic priest. We don't have the sense that, we don't have this idea that a priest has to be unmarried. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, the Kohen Gadol had to be married. I think that's correct. I'm not positive about that, but something tells me that just came to me as something that I learned, that he had to be married. And also it says that the blessings don't come to you unless you're married. And there's lots of good that comes from being married. And we don't want our priests to be unmarried. We want them to be married. They have to partake of all that Hashem gives us in this world. That's the major element here. We're not trying to deny ourselves anything. And also, as I said, because we believe that blessings come to a man if he's married, if he has a family, if he has a wife. Okay, so we talked a lot about holiness in marriage last time and how the union between a man and a woman is.
How about a woman?
What about a woman? That she needs
Blessings
to be married?
come to a woman.
Well, she brings the blessings. She's the source of the blessings.
What about a woman that's not married?
Right. A woman doesn't have a requirement to be married or to reproduce.
Interesting.
Yes.
We'll talk
Yeah.
about that another time.
Well, we've mentioned before the mitzvah of pru or revu to reproduce is only on the man. So a woman doesn't have the obligation to marry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Hi, Miriam.
I'm sorry.
No problem. No problem. So we talked again about the union of a man and a woman, a physical union, leading to and being the conduit to a spiritual unity, a spiritual union. And it's a very difficult concept, as we've described. It's a very difficult concept to really swallow because it's so different from the secular view of physical relationships. We have typically in Western society, we've had two approaches to sexuality. One is, on the one hand, you have a sort of Greek ideal of pleasure for its own sake, hedonism. Pleasure as an end, material enjoyment as an end in itself, right? So in that view, they worshipped pleasure, physical pleasure. On the other hand, you had the polar opposite view of sexuality from the Catholic and then the Christian way of looking at it, which is that sex is sinful, right? And it's an expression of man's sinful nature. It's the base animalistic sort of elements of our nature. And marriage was a necessary evil to tame this nature. But celibacy is the ideal. And if you can't really, you feel that your animal nature is coming through and you can't deny it, well, then get married. And at least there you have the blessing, the godly, blessing of that union. So it's okay. We don't view that. We discussed this many times that we don't have that view of, well, it's really a b'diavad, which means secondary choice, right? So in both of these, by the way, both these worldviews, the first and the second, the hedonism and the sinful aspect of it, the woman is seen in a very negative light, right? In the first example of the Greek philosophy towards sexuality, the woman is an object, a pleasure object, right? She's a sex object. She's something that I can use for my enjoyment. In the second view of the Christian church, she's evil. She is a temptress, right? She's reminded. She retains Eve's tempting nature. She's evil, but both of those views have as their common denominator the idea that sexuality at its root is a base physical pleasure. In other words, there's nothing more than the material physical pleasure of the act, right? We don't have that view, as we discussed many times. We believe that every material and human emotion and physical act can be elevated to the spiritual holy level, right? Even today, in today's society, you have this idea of, if it feels good, do it. If it's right for me, I'm going to do it. Right? Thanks to the 60s, the 60s, especially the 1960s, it became something that was, just let it all hang out, feel good, feels good in this moment. I'm going to do it in this moment. Right? It's all about me, really. Also, it's all about, it's a very body-oriented thing. I see you, I'm attracted to you. Let's go. What are we waiting for? That's basically what it's become. And
me and chocolate.
That's good. I love that. The feminism has also done a great disservice in this way. Feminism, some of it has been about let's make women as free and easy with their bodies and with giving their bodies to as much as men have been right. So this idea of freeing women from the prejudice of the idea of someone who is, the slut, let's say, right? The idea of freeing women from that idea has been supposedly very freeing to women, where women can now sleep with as many men as men sleep with women, and it's all great and wonderful. But as a result, it's actually degraded women even more, because now they're just even more of sex objects, right? They're even more. It's the men are saying, "Whoa, we had a good deal here. Yay, feminism!" What's not to like about that? Women can, yeah.
Just as a counterpoint to that, I was teaching at Clay High School, how women dress and behave and stuff like that. And some guys actually said, you appreciate someone who acts like a lady. A few of them.
Yeah.
And the women don't know how.
That's right. They've lost that idea. That very idea of acting like a lady is so foreign and seemingly old-fashioned. When I was younger, when I was one of my jobs, this is when I was still single, and I remember one of my coworkers, who was a young woman, asking me. I guess we'd been talking about, she was not Jewish. I've been talking about the Jewish way of going about courtship and marriage, and I mentioned we don't have physical relations before, and she said to me, she was amazed and shocked, and she said, "Well, how do you know if you're attracted to somebody if you don't?" And my thinking, I was struck by the fact that I didn't answer her then, but later the answer came to a response came to me. What do you think has been done for millennia? You got here for a reason. Your parents and I don't know about your parents, your grandparents, your great grandparents, they didn't do any of that stuff, and now it's just considered par for the course. It's just considered, so this idea of being a lady is so old-fashioned to a lot of people.
What decade did this conversation occur in?
Huh?
What decade?
This was the 90s. Wow. Yeah, so it was pretty...
Things changed a lot from the 70s to the 90s.
That's correct. That's correct. That's correct. Where this woman was, her entire, the foundation of her thinking was, why not? We just... how could you not? How could you? It's just a weird thing in her point of view. It was a weird idea, abstention until marriage. It's just like, why? Why would you do that? It's become, the thinking is so different from what it used to be. Right. Right. Okay. So anyway, as we said, as we've talked about time and again regarding sexuality, to us, it's about wanting to give to the other person. It's about wanting to make a higher connection. It's not just about body pleasure. And of course, it's a holy act, not only when it results in children. Again, everything is potentially godly. Everything has a spiritual potential. And nothing in our mindset that God gives us on this earth is degraded or dirty. We don't have the idea of shame unless it's something that God tells us not to do. Right? So we have strictures and we have laws about sexual relationships, right? You can't engage in marriage with your father or with your sister, certain things like that. But you're making a face, but
No, I'm in agreement.
Okay.
Agree.
No, I know you are. And we talked at length about examples of where the Torah considers kiddushin, marriage, holy, for potential for holiness. Marriage itself is called kiddushin, the act of separating yourself from everybody else, right, to join your spouse. The Rambam says the act of union is holy and pure. The Midrash says that at the moment of physical union, angels are created. I didn't mention that. I don't think I mentioned that in our previous classes. So how do we become kadosh and holy in everyday life? As we mentioned, when we have something physical about us, when we have a physical act like eating, there are things that we do to make the act holy. We make a bracha on the food. We eat only kosher animals, etc. We eat, we separate milk and meat and all the other things that we know that we have to do. All the halachos that pertain to food and our eating, it makes the act of eating, it just transforms it. It transforms us from something physical to something spiritual. And the same thing is with laws about how we relate to other people as well, right? So not just in terms of what God asks of us, but in terms of what we're expected to do by other people, to treat people with respect, to follow the laws of justice, right? To follow the laws of correct business dealings, etc. When we follow these laws that are called bein adam lechavero, between man and his fellow man, we are elevating our personal relationships to the holy status, right? So too with marriage, as we discussed. So we're taking the most instinctive physical function and we're raising it to a high level. Mikvah is one of the ways we do this. We talked, again, the previous subject matter was about how we do that in the one-on-one sense between a husband and wife. And mikvah is another way of doing that, okay? Instead of becoming an animalistic thing, it becomes a higher function. Now, the reason that we have so many laws about this, and we really didn't get into any of Taharas Mishpacha, and we're not going to do that either today, but we do have so many rules, right, about mikvah and the time that a woman is nida, separated. And Rashi says this is because, Rashi says when you have holiness, anytime you have a potential for holiness, it comes with a lot of rules and regulations, right? For example, Shabbos. Shabbos is an example of holiness in time, as we said, right? It's an oasis in time. It is a way of imbuing one day with spirituality. As a result, you're going to have a lot of rules and regulations about what to do, what not to do. If we're going to be transforming that day, if we're going to be moving it to a plane that is not physical, but a spiritual plane, then we've got to do a lot of different things that we don't do on the other days. We're going to restrict ourselves, etc., etc. So you have a lot of laws. The Kohen, who is an example of a spiritual, holy person, also has a lot of rules and laws on him, as well as the Beis HaMikdash itself had a lot of rules and regulations about what you can do there, what you cannot do there, what you can bring there, what you may not bring there. Right? How you approach it, how you have to, what state the person has to be in when they go. And that's actually also connects to mikvah, because that was one of the things that a person did to prepare themselves to go into the Beis HaMikdash. So a lot of rules and regulations, okay? So again, that is the basis of the idea behind mikvah. Mikvah elevates, okay? So let's look at the biblical source for this. For the biblical source for mikvah is Leviticus do not approach a woman in her state of tumah. Okay, in her state of tumah. I'm going to discuss tumah in a minute. Also, Leviticus, when a woman has a flow of blood, where blood flows from her body, she shall be nida for 7 days. Nida means separated, by the way. Doesn't mean anything else. Okay? And then further, she shall count 7 days, and then she shall be purified. Okay? So we're going to discuss how this happens a little bit later. I want to discuss the concepts of tahor and tameh. Pure ritual purity and ritual impurity. Okay, because that is the basis for the mitzvah, for the law, right? Then she shall be purified. So what is she being purified from? She's being purified by the mikvah, through the mikvah, from her state of impurity. So what does this mean? Impure, pure. All right, we have to explain what this means. It's a very difficult, I'm going to go slow because it's a very difficult concept to explain, let alone understand. There is no English or secular translation or equivalent to ritual purity and ritual impurity. Okay? It's very difficult to understand. In fact, the Rambam says the laws of tumah and tahara, tumah meaning ritual impurity, tahara meaning ritual purity, are decrees of the Torah that cannot be comprehended by human wisdom. That's what the Rambam says. You can't understand it. All right. He further says immersion is also a matter which must be accepted on faith. For ritual impurity is not mud or filth which washes off with water. Okay, it's not mud or filth. That's very important to understand. By the way, proof that it's not, and again, this is really, one of the misconceptions, the popular misconception about ritual impurity, and especially regarding the woman going to the mikvah, is that she's somehow unclean. I don't use that word unclean. Impurity doesn't mean unclean. But there's this idea that the mikvah is washing her of some dirt, right? This is absolutely untrue. Proof that it's untrue, proof that the mikvah is not a conduit to cleanliness, physical cleanliness, is that a woman, the laws of mikvah require that a woman must be absolutely spotless before she goes into the mikvah. She cannot have any obstacles between the water and her skin. She cannot have any dirt. She cannot have any stains. She can't have any Band-Aids. Any dead skin is even considered an obstacle. She has to be 1,000% clean in order for the mitzvah of mikvah to take place, for it to be a valid immersion. So that's proof positive that the waters of the mikvah are not cleaning her off in a physical way at all. Okay. In fact, it's easier a little bit to explain what impurity is not than what it is. So what it's not, as I said, it's not a physical dirtiness. It's not evil. It's not a sin. It's not sinful, and it's not shameful or degrading in any way, right? It doesn't cause any physical consequences. It's basically imperceptible. And as a matter of fact, most of us are walking around in a state of ritual impurity, and we just don't know it.
What do you mean?
What I mean is there are lots of, well, I'm going to actually explain.
Okay.
There are a lot of different ways that you can become ritually impure, man or woman.
Mhm.
One of them is connecting in some way to a dead body. Touching a dead body or being in the same room as a dead body will also make you ritually impure. If you've ever been to a funeral, you're impure, right? The only way to get out of that state of impurity, connection to a dead body, is we have to have the temple. We don't have the temple, so we're all walking around in a state of ritual impurity. Even women who go to the mikvah are still ritually impure from that contact. But I'm going to talk about that in a minute, what the ways to get impure. So what it is simply a spiritual state of being, impurity, right? It's a spiritual state of being. Like darkness is the absence of light, tumah is the absence of tahara. So ritual impurity is the absence of purity. That's really all it is. Okay, and as I said, I quoted the Rambam. These are decrees of the Torah we just can't understand. It's a basic state of being, and some of the most basic human functions put us into that ritual state, a state of ritual impurity. Almost every member of society, even when the temple existed, went from one state to the other. Become ritually impure, the mikvah purifies me, and it's just an objective state. You should seek to avoid it if possible, but it's something that can be used, it can be removed by following certain procedures. So here are some examples. Lest you think that a woman is the only impure creature who could walk on the face of the earth. It's not true. Any person, man or woman, could become ritually impure. Here are some examples. If a man has a seminal emission, all right, that's one way. If you develop sara'as is the skin disease that God would bring first to the walls of your house, then if you didn't pay attention to that, your clothing, and then ultimately your actual body. That made you ritually impure if you got sara'as. Okay, that's another example. As I mentioned, coming into contact with a dead body makes you ritually impure. So if you're in a funeral home, okay, or a cemetery, okay, a Kohen today has to try as much as possible to not come into contact with a dead body, right? So my husband, who's a Kohen, cannot attend funerals. The exception is his parents, his father, mother. He was able to go into the cemetery for that, but otherwise he would not be able to.
What about his family?
I don't know. I thank God I haven't had the question. Haven't had to answer the question. But I know that when it came up, when his father passed away and then his mother passed away, I knew that the exception existed there, that he was allowed to give respect. Now I'm not sure. The reason I say I'm not sure is because it could be that parents are the exception because they are your parents and you want to give them a final respect in a way that chas v'shalom, God forbid, your sister and brother are not on the same level as your parents. So I'm not sure if it applies with your immediate family. It might only be parents. And as a result, he can't do any funerals. He can't perform funerals for other people as well. So in Bangor, we had a very interesting setup where he was able to stand outside the gates of the cemetery. And that's really, really it's all open air, but that gate makes a difference halachically. And he was able to stand outside the gate and pipe his voice into the cemetery. So there was a way that he actually was able to do that. But other than that, he can't do that. So coming into contact with a dead body puts you from a ritually pure position to impure. Menstruant woman, of course, which is our topic, and a woman who's given birth also goes from a ritually pure state to a ritually impure state. Okay, now the question is, what do all these things have in common? What is it about all these things? Seminal emission, developing sara'as, coming into contact with a dead body, menstruant woman, and childbirth. What do they all have in common that makes the person undergoing these things ritually impure? Anyone know? Yeah, go ahead.
It diminishes their life force.
Yes, in a way, yes. There's in each of these cases a connection to death. So let's go through them again and see what does that mean. So the connection to death when it comes to contact with a dead body, that's kind of easy, right? Contact with a dead body, by the way, is the most extreme form of becoming ritually impure because the body is no longer able to express the soul, right? The soul is completely gone from the body. It's pure physicality. So there's a death of there's a death. So it's the strongest way of becoming ritually impure. Seminal emission. Let's actually talk about developing sara'as. Developing sara'as, a skin disease that God brings because we're told because of speaking lashon hara. Okay, we don't have it now, of course, anymore, but in the times of the temple, we did. So the Gemara tells us that someone who has sara'as is like a dead person. And the reason why that I can't remember who says this. One contemporary commentator says the reason is because the person who develops saras has to be separated from everyone else, and so he's alone. So someone who's alone is considered dead. There's no connection to other people, so they're considered like dead. Okay, coming in contact with a dead body, developing saras. Now let's discuss a seminal emission, a menstruant woman, and childbirth. So how are those things connected to death? It's very odd to say that someone who's given birth has now gone down in a spiritual level to become ritually impure, right? So the connection to death with the childbirth as well as with the menstruant woman. Okay, so let's take a woman who has the possibility to become pregnant, right? So a woman who has the possibility, the potential to become pregnant, right, has the potential of life in her. Right? The moment that she starts to bleed, in other words, the moment she gets her period, that potential for life is no longer there. She is now in a state of not being able to produce life. So she goes from potential life giver which is up here, let's say, to a state of no longer being able to produce life. That's the connection to the imperfection of man, or the idea of loss of life. There's a loss of potential for life. That's the connection to ritual impurity. That's why she becomes impure. The same thing with a woman who's just given birth. When she was pregnant, the potential for life was still there. After she gives birth, even though she's just given birth, there's a new baby but she now loses that potential.
I'm wondering if, related to this, what you mean is this. If a woman has just given birth, she cannot immediately become pregnant. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
It's not
exactly
physically possible for her to become pregnant.
In the same way that when she has her period, she can't become pregnant. There's a loss of potential life-giving.
Is that a physiological truth?
Sure.
Yes, it is true.
Well, certainly within a very short time she can get pregnant. Within weeks.
Yeah, for sure. Right.
Yes.
Right. And within
that very day.
That's right.
Okay.
And from the moment she becomes nida, meaning the moment she has her period, right, and she has to separate from her husband, which we'll get to a little later. The moment that happens, she cannot become pregnant until physiologically, what is happening in her body? Well, in the case of childbirth, a child is born, and there's no potential. There's no other egg that's ready to be inseminated.
Why not? I mean, the eggs are there.
No, but they're not. But they haven't come physiologically. They have to come down the fallopian tube, right?
But we're talking about potential, though. And she has her eggs.
Yeah, she has her eggs, but she can't become pregnant at that time. So therefore, that's what it is. That's what it basically is. She loses that potential.
She has future potential.
Right. She has
not
theoretical potential, but not immediate potential.
Right.
Not practical potential.
But also, right after you give birth, you're exhausted and you're sore. But then who would want to have intercourse anyway?
Right.
And
Right.
So in that regard, I see it as a loss of potential life just because you're like.
Right. However, that's the way a rational person would be. Some people have
Right.
male mates that don't care.
Right.
Exactly.
But
So they might
Exactly.
okay. Right. But we're talking
so
physiologically. There's no potential for life to form, for life to begin.
After run that one past
Okay.
my brother-in-law.
Okay. Was he a doctor?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's pretty solid, medically speaking. But if I'm wrong, please let me know.
So what you're saying is that potential is not until that egg goes down those fallopian tubes.
Oh yeah, right, and attaches to the uterus, the walls of the uterus.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen until it's fertilized.
No. It does attach to the walls of the uterus,
Okay.
and then what eventually happens over the course of a woman's cycle is that the egg and the walls of the uterus, if the egg is not fertilized that month, start to break down.
Right.
It's that breaking down of the walls of the uterus that lead to the period, the blood, right? That's what's coming out.
It's quite amazing.
It is amazing. It's an amazing system.
It's
Yeah.
mind-boggling.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, fascinatingly, in my opinion, fertilization becomes possible only in terms of time period once a woman goes to the mikvah. They say that the ideal time for fertilization is 7 to 10 days after your period ends. So that's an amazing thing, an amazing insight into the benefits of one of the benefits of the system of Taras Mishpacha, of separating and coming together. So that's a woman who has a child, and a woman who is a menstruant woman. Again, she goes from she had the potential to give life. When she starts to bleed, there's no potential. Check with your brother-in-law. Okay. And the same thing is with a man who has a seminal emission. Okay, seminal emission means semen is coming out of the body. So that possibility, as long as it was in the body, it was potential for life. When it exits the body with no outlet, with no other physical being accepting that, so you now have the potential of, you now have the loss of life. You've done something that wasted life, as it were. So again, the man is coming down the same spiritual ladder that the woman does when she has her period. It's, exactly the same thing happens. It goes from a state of ritual purity to a state of ritual impurity. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Isn't there something connected with the temple that people who are disabled or something like that, crippled in some way, can't go to the temple or give sacrifices, or they're limited from some ritual things because of their disabledness?
Well,
And I was just wondering about that, like if it's something they couldn't help, why is there, it sort of offends the modern mind.
Sure.
These people are
Sure.
discriminated
Sure.
against.
Right. You wanted to answer that?
Oh.
You want to say something
what
before I?
Please correct me if I'm wrong. I have heard that certain
Why don't you
kinds
shut it
of
off?
physical deformities meant
Shut
that
it
a
off.
person could not serve as a Kohen.
That's correct.
And
It's
the idea is Hashem made this person that way. Not that they don't have their own thing to be contributing to Jewish society, but any disability is something that came from Hashem, for whatever his reasons are.
right. So yes, you are referring to the Kohen, the priests who served in the temple. So they had to be perfect. They had to be in their physical bodies had to be perfect, even to the point of not needing, of having perfect vision. Someone who wears eyeglasses would not be able to do certain things in the temple.
But people could still bring sacrifices.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Even if they had a different.
I think so.
Anybody could
Yeah, I think
bring
so. Yeah.
sacrifices.
Right. So the question is why. So again, that still doesn't really answer your complaint of it just
What was
seems
your
wrong.
Well,
Well,
isn't it discriminating against disabled people?
Okay.
Why is their life force less? Why are they barred from certain rituals?
Okay, so it can be discriminatory, and it is discriminatory because Hashem says He wants in His temple people who do not have any deformities. He wants people who are whole, shalem, who are complete. Now, again, on the surface, it does seem discriminatory, but we discriminate against people with difficulties and disabilities all the time, even though we claim not to. We try not to. We certainly don't intend to. But I mean, as a very simple example, someone who is putting on a Broadway show, and requires dancers for this Broadway show, has auditions and people will come and try out for them. Obviously, there's going to be picking and choosing as to who is the better dancer, let alone who has two legs rather than one leg, right? So there is a certain amount of discrimination that we do because we have when we have a certain level of performance or a certain standard that we are looking to present, right? And I think the Broadway show example, it's not a great example by any means.
No,
But
that's not a good example.
it's not a great example, but what it's showing is it's something that, right, the people putting.
But it's a very modern example. And,
Well,
the modern mind doesn't say, well, everybody should be able to be in a Broadway show.
Well, but yeah, that's true. But the point is, I mean, all right, even if you want to, take it out of the realm of physical activity that requires 2 feet, right? When you're putting on a production and you're presenting something to the world in what you hope is the best possible state, right? You are looking for the best possible players, right?
But wouldn't it be the spiritual level that you're on?
No,
That
what I'm
either
saying,
qualifies you or disqualifies you?
you mean to go into the temple.
Yeah, not having a leg missing or a cripple.
Right.
Is it
So-
saying that if you're deformed in any way that you can't achieve the same spiritual heights? Is that?
I don't know if I would put it that way exactly. I'm not sure I would put it that way. It's just like this. The temple was the holiest place on earth. It housed God's Shekhinah, the presence of God was there. And what part of the purpose of everything having to be perfect that goes into the temple, including the people who work there, everything that went into the temple was on such a high level of perfection. Everything, the mixture of the spices that they used had to be exactly this number of spices, 11 or 12 kinds, and this exact recipe. And if you screwed up one thing, you were worthy of death. You were subject to the death penalty, and that everything associated with the temple was on that level of perfection. Okay, this had to be from here, and this had to be from here, and a person, the Kohanim who worked there, their thoughts had to be completely pure and holy whenever they did temple work. It was a really high level of expectation, and part of the reason for that, which is what the Sefer HaChinuch says, is that it was supposed to imbue in the minds of the people in the temple. It was supposed to imbue this sense of absolute holiness of the place. That it's not for God, but rather for ourselves. So in that sense, maybe it's a little bit more understandable when we say we want perfect specimens of the human beings to go into the temple. We don't want anything imperfect. Again, that has to do with thoughts, that has to do with clothing that you wore. There were specific items of clothing that the Kohanim wore, right? They had to be put on in a certain way. This goes on first, then that goes on. So every little detail of anything connected to the temple was on a level that, was far removed from just the everyday. And that's the definition of holiness, is that anything that we did, had to be on this level. And so that was part of it, I think. And again, I think was more to impress upon us going in that, look, there's nothing out of place. There's nothing that's imperfect. Yeah. What do you want to say?
Maybe it's also one of those things that can't be understood. We don't know why Hashem brings a deformity on a person.
That's a different question. Yeah. Right. Why Hashem brings deformity.
But then that person can't be offering sacrifices in the temple. However, if we had the temple today, the majority of men would be disqualified automatically because they're not Kohanim. Does that mean that they can't reach any spiritual heights?
Exactly. Another good point. Only Kohanim would be allowed to do certain jobs. And not only that, the Kohanim and the Levium jobs were not the Levium, the Levites. Their jobs were not interchangeable. The Levium had their jobs, the Kohanim had their jobs. And, you could make the same argument there, right? Mm-hmm. Why this tribe was set apart to do the work in the Beis HaMikdash. You're saying, I'm not good enough. I'm not a Kohen. I'm not a Bas Kohen. So why wouldn't I be able to do the work? So again, it's hard to understand this concept of holiness and why God chose Levim as a whole other topic. It's a very interesting topic, but yeah, go ahead. But that's a similar kind of idea of segregating the population. Yeah.
There's a Western idea about the church being the center of holiness and the church being the center of spiritual elevation, but that's not a Jewish idea at all. So it's true that the Beis Hamikdash did have certain strong qualities, but we also had the Jewish home at that time. So the Jewish homes were they each had their own holiness too.
That's true. Absolutely. Of course. There was no place like the temple, of course.
Right,
The temple had the presence of God, and it had the holy vessels that we used there. And of course, it was the only place you could do the sacrifices. You could bring the sacrifices. But our families are considered miniature temples. Our houses, our tables, as we said, are all connected. And we say they're surrogates for the temple. Yeah. Okay. So getting back to the topic. So every instance of ritual impurity is connected to death and man's imperfection in some way, right? We have an imperfection in that we give birth, and they're all connected in the loss of life. Okay. But the idea of falling is connected to the idea of rising, meaning, we have this, and then this is what Tumah and Tahara is. As I said before, we have cycles where we fall in spiritual height and we rise, and then we go up again. Tumah and Tahara, we fall and we rise. Falling leads to rising higher in a way, and that's how we function. We go down, we go up. Through Tumah, we become Tahara and reach an even greater level, ideally. So, by the way, now let's talk about what sort of effect Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity, what effect it had practically, or what effect it has practically in our life. So today, it's practically useless. There's no point, except aside from the woman who goes to the mikvah on a monthly basis, aside from the convert, which we'll talk about in a little while, and even in the times of the temple, there was no purpose, there was no practical application of Tumah and Tahara, purity and impurity, except as it relates to a person's entering the Beis Hamikdash. In other words, the only way it was practical in daily life, let's say I became tameh, I touched a dead body, or I went into the room of the dead body, what can I not do? Nothing. I can do everything except go to the temple, right? I can eat with my family, I can touch my husband, I can whatever, I can do all my daily living doesn't change. My status doesn't change, right? The tsaras, the metzora, the person who got tsaras was a little different. They had to go through a cycle of getting rid of their tsaras that involved going away from the camp, etc. But even in the case of the metzora, the person got tsaras, there was no practical application of impurity unless you're talking about going into the temple. Because the only reason it mattered was that a person could not go into the temple if they're ritually impure or partake of the food. That was it. That's the only practical application. Today, since we don't have a temple, right? And by the way, the temple also was the method by which you became pure. The end method actually was also, the mikvah was the end method, sorry. The culmination of the purification process was the mikvah, okay, to each of these examples of ritual impurity, right? Okay. But today, because we don't have the temple, it's inoperative. It's a moot point. We're all, as I said, we're all tameh, we're all ritually impure from something or other, most probably because of our connection to death, to dead bodies, to funerals, and so on, okay? So it was only significant because someone who was tameh could not go into the Beis Hamikdash. Today, outside of the menstruant woman, as I said, Tumah and Tahara have no effect on our lives, okay? So now let's talk about the nida. Let's talk about the woman who goes to the mikvah. What's up with the nida? What's the issue here with the nida? Okay, the word, as I said, nida, means separated. Okay, so it refers to a woman who got her period. That's basically what a nida is. And a nida is also a woman who
Nida or
nida. It's a
With an
it's no. In other words, I'm saying a as the article a.
Oh, so
Right.
the word is nida.
Right.
Okay.
Nida.
Yeah,
Mhm.
N-I-D-D-A-H, right?
Well, any way you want to spell it. In Hebrew, nun yud dalet hey. Okay. So the nida, I'll refer to her as the nida or a nida. That's what I'm talking about. The woman who is a menstruant woman. Okay. So one thing we have to clear up. Okay. There's been lots of misconceptions again, as we said earlier, about a nida. We, the Torah, Hashem, the Jewish people, do not consider a nida, a menstruant woman, dirty, as we proved to you, right? The mikvah is not an attempt to cleanse her. It simply means separation. She is separate, meaning that the moment that she becomes a nida, she has to separate from her husband physically, right? She cannot have relations, okay? There's no taboo against the menstruating woman in Judaism. Okay, nothing in primitive societies do have taboos against them. They attribute it to an evil force. We don't have this concept at all. She can go to shul. She can kiss the Torah. She can kiss.
Can?
Yes.
Oh, that was a no.
I had also, not from
We don't-
South Bend, but
Mhm.
I had heard about not going to shul at that time, not touching the Torah when the Torah comes down.
It used to be something. It used to be done. It's not done anymore like that. It may have been a minhag. Obviously, it wasn't a halacha because halacha stands. But
So minhag,
it was minhag.
Minhag doesn't usually go away though.
It's true. That's true. I would have to get back to you on how this one went away. Okay. She can touch other males that she's related to, just not her husband, right? So she can touch her son. You can't transfer. That's another thing about ritual impurity. You can't transfer it by touch.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we're not allowed to, let's say a woman needs some help to get out of the car. The husband can't help her.
Cannot.
She
Right.
can't touch him.
Right.
So that's touch.
Right. I'm saying everybody except for her husband,
Oh.
all the other males in her life, she can touch. Okay. So it doesn't transfer to other men.
Got it.
Okay, it's not a hygiene issue. Okay. As we said, Tumah is the absence of life. Women are closer to God because of their ability to give life. We can give life. Men can't give birth. So therefore, they're coming down when they get the period. They're coming down, as we said, from a potential of life-giving to now I no longer have that potential, right? So they have to be raised up again in status, like all of the examples of impure people who have been touched by ritual impurity. You have to be raised up to that status of life giver again. Okay. So how does that happen? How does mikvah purify from tumah to, how does that work? Right? How does that actually work? So,
Good question.
You're what?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. How does it work?
Is it also the same reason why we wash our hands before we on Shabbos before we